Human Rights Watch is accusing Egyptian authorities of carrying out a months-long campaign of arbitrary arrests, detention, and deportations of refugees and asylum seekers, many of them from Sudan and South Sudan. The rights group says that bureaucratic delays in renewing residency permits has left thousands at risk, despite many holding valid UN refugee documentation. Egypt denies violating its international obligations. And for more on the findings, I spoke to Michelle Randhawa in New York. She's a senior refugee and migrant rights officer at Human Rights Watch. Michelle Randhawa, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Channel Africa.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
So, Michelle, what did Human Rights Watch uncover during its investigation into the treatment of refugees and asylum seekers in Egypt?
Yeah, so during the course of the research and reporting, I spoke with 19 refugees and asylum seekers, primarily from Sudan and South Sudan, but also from Ethiopia and Eritrea. And they painted a pretty difficult picture of life in Egypt right now. They spoke to me about issues related to access to education for their children, workplace issues, issues with landlords. But the overall encompassing issue that they're facing is this months long crackdown that's being conducted by Egyptian authorities.
Your report suggests that many of these people are being arrested just because their residency permits have expired. I wonder, how has the administrative backlog contributed to this situation?
Yeah, so when someone comes to Egypt and files an asylum claim with UNHCR, they enter into a process called refugee status determination. This is conducted by UNHCR to determine whether or not they have a well-founded fear of persecution if they're returned to their country of origin. Separate from that is that every non-Egyptian in Egypt is required to maintain valid residency. And for refugees and asylum seekers, this is something that they're required to renew annually. So the issues of this backlog come into play at this point because there is one office that issues residency permits. And the backlog is so great that they are scheduling out appointments sometimes 2+ years. So imagine you have a 1 year residency permit and you're given an appointment to renew it 2 years later. So while waiting for that appointment, you lose your residency status.
And it seems as if many of those affected are from Sudan and South Sudan. Why are these communities particularly vulnerable at this time?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, there is a months long crackdown campaign against refugees and asylum seekers in general. This includes, increased police checkpoints in and around areas where refugees and asylum seekers live. The people I spoke to talked about being singled out for ID checks while they're walking to work, running an errand, even in taxis, having their taxis being told to pull over for them to get out. And there is an element of racial profiling that we've discovered. One woman I spoke to said she was traveling in a taxi with two other companions, and she said authorities pulled her over because she and her companions are Black.
Wow, that's quite sad to hear. So we say racial profiling, but the word that we understand is that this is racism.
Yes, indeed. And it's not just, in this crackdown, it's the daily life as well. Uniformly, the people I spoke to talked to me about daily harassment, daily racism, simply because of what they look like.
Some of those detained reportedly had valid UNHCR registration cards. What does that tell us about how these cases are being handled? I think you've sort of partly answered that already.
Yeah, so when someone makes an asylum claim with UNHCR, they're given a UNHCR card, and this denotes then that they have an active asylum claim. And when their claim has been decided upon, when UNHCR has determined, yes, they have a well-founded fear of persecution, if they're returned to their home country, they're given a blue card. Now, all of these cards, whether they have an active asylum claim or if they have the blue card, this should afford the holder a certain level of protection against detention and definitely deportation, especially with an active asylum claim. And what we found in the course of our research and reporting is that Egyptian authorities didn't care about the valid UNHCR cards. The two men I spoke to who were deported to Juba had valid UNHCR cards, and the authorities didn't want that. They wanted their residency status, which unfortunately they did not have. They only had their appointments set.
It sounds as if that there are rules and regulations that are quite clear. Um, what are the authorities saying about these disparities, particularly the racial profiling and these unfair deportations without proper individual assessments? What excuse are they giving?
Well, I mean, we've heard from Egyptian authorities that, they say that they're following their international obligations. They say that, this is just necessary steps that they're undertaking. But at least in the course of our research, the two men who were deported did not have an individualized risk assessment. They were simply arrested for not having a valid residency status, despite valid UNHCR cards and despite having their residency appointments set. They were detained in Egyptian jails and eventually moved to a deportation center and deported.
I believe Egypt has introduced a new asylum law in 2024. From your perspective, where is that law falling short, perhaps, in protecting refugees and asylum seekers?
Yeah, so the law, the 2024 asylum law, there are a number of issues with it, but I would highlight then that it fails to specifically prohibit refoulement. That's a major issue that even before its implementation, we're seeing, and the law is due to be implemented um, sometime next year, unless the government extends the transition period. And there's a real concern that unless they amend this asylum law and its bylaws, there aren't going to be strong protections against refoulement for refugees and asylum seekers and could very well put them at continued risk.
So, what immediate steps is Human Rights Watch calling on the Egyptian authorities to address these concerns?
I mean, in the immediate term, Egyptian authorities should halt all arbitrary arrests, detention, and deportation of refugees and asylum seekers, especially those based on solely expired residency permits. Egypt is a state party to the 1951 Refugee Convention, and it's also a state party to the 1969 OAU Convention on Refugees. So Human Rights Watch is calling on them to amend the asylum law and its bylaws to bring it in line with its international responsibilities.
What role should the international community play, do you think? The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees perhaps play in helping ensure that refugees and asylum seekers in Egypt are protected?
Absolutely. I think that, international donors, countries should press Egypt to fall in line with its international obligations. UNHCR as well is facing in Egypt is facing an enormous backlog. I think in 2025, they had the largest refugee status determination operation worldwide. And that is because of the ongoing conflict in Sudan and the over 1.1 million refugees from Sudan alone that are now in Egypt. So UNHCR as well, they should be supporting UNHCR.
What are they telling you about their personal experience? What words are they using, the refugees, about how they feel and how they're being treated?
I mean, I'm struck by one person I spoke with, a man from South Sudan, who simply said that the daily harassment and racism is just something that he has to endure. It was almost just he couldn't say anything. He didn't feel empowered to say anything. Another Ethiopian man who has a UNHCR blue card, so he has been determined to have a well-founded fear of persecution, um, who has valid residency, told me that even with his valid residency, every time he goes out, he's afraid. He's worried what might happen. Um, Another man, from Sudan told me that every morning when he wakes up, he just prays that he gets to where he's going safely. And he doesn't know if he's going to come home or not that night. So these are extraordinarily sad stories. And, I just think of the people who I spoke with and how they just, I mean, everything that they've gone through coming to Egypt, looking for safety, looking for security for themselves, for their children. Many of them had children, only to be met with daily harassment and racism and instability, which is, I mean, especially anybody would be searching for stability, for peace, for safety, and for especially them to be facing this is, well, Egypt needs to fall in line with its international obligations to really amend this situation.
Michelle Randhawa, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so, so much indeed for joining us and highlighting this really sad situation. And let's hope that it gets the attention that it needs. Thanks so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much.